Welcome back to Heartbeat, the show where mid-market CIOs get real-world insight on tech, transformation, and leadership. Today's guest is John Georgatos, CIO of Mike Morse Law Firm and Interim Global CIO at VaynerMedia. From legal tech to global advertising, John's led bold, fast-moving transformations like a full IT overhaul in just 90 days. He's known for driving measurable impact through AI, Salesforce, and agile insourcing, and a leadership style rooted in clarity and candor. If you're navigating change fatigue, tight budgets, or pressure to align IT with strategy, this episode is for you. So let's jump in. John, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
So maybe you can just walk us through what inspired your shift from global advertising to legal and now to tech and IT leadership.
Yeah, it's a good question. I had spent most of my years in advertising. I had started at WPP and was there for about 10 years. And then pivoted over to MDC Partners, which eventually became Stagwell, and led the acquisition there. And it's a beautiful industry and I respect it still immensely, but I started to see a couple of years ago the writing on the wall of it also being an agency that's not, I wouldn't say it's going to go away, but had its issues and problems. And I started to see it early on, especially the holding companies. More smaller, nimble agencies, I think, do quite well. But the larger holding company, that model, I just felt like it was a sort of an old model and not a great model to be in. And I wanted to make an impact. I felt I had made an impact in that industry from a legacy standpoint. I put a stamp there and said, okay, I've been there, done that. And I wanted something new and challenging. And legal kind of fell on my lap. It was not something I was looking for, but interesting enough, and looking back and in retrospect, it's one of those industries that is quite important to the world, that healthcare, government, and yet the technology element of those industries, most of them, especially legal, are very antiquated. And so to me, that screamed challenge and something where I can apply my years of experience and bring something that I've done in a different industry and apply it here and see if I can transform it and help with moving that antiquated model into kind of the future.
So in the intro, we mentioned a 90-day turnaround. Can you give us a little bit more detail?
Yeah, when you've come from the world I came from, which was large global enterprise and stuff, and I've seen the things that I've seen, being able to apply them at a smaller organization, to me, it didn't mean that I had to take years to perform a transformation. I'm not doing the right thing. In fact, every transformation, I've been very vocal about this over the years, should happen at a fast pace. It shouldn't take 3 years or 4 years or 5 years to transform. And in fact, when you think about where we are today from a technology standpoint, you can't afford to do that because everything is changing so rapid. You take AI and what's happening in that space now, right? Anything that you've done, the statistic is it's moving every 4 weeks, right? So every 4 weeks, that landscape is changing. And so the days where you could get away with not investing in your technology, and a lot of companies would go a year to 2 to 3 years of just not making an investment and staying status quo, that's over, in my opinion. You can't do that. You can't afford to do that as a business. And then you take somebody like a law firm who for years they've neglected technology, 10 and 15 years, that's your death. If you don't go back and make a proper investment, you're digging your own grave. And so to me, rapid transformations, especially for legacy law firms, is critical to bring them up to par where they need to be and then continue maintaining that for what the next chapter of this technology transformation is, which is obviously AI. 90 days to me was a walk in a park for Mike Morse. We'll use that as the example because that's really what sort of made a name for myself in this industry, which was basically taking at the time, I think Mike Morse was about 180 people, and then really kind of taking this 10-year gap that they had from the technology and bring them 100% to the cloud, do a complete shift on their hardware and move them in the right direction, create the process, the automation, and then wrapping that all up with security and being able to do that for 90 days. I can't speak for other CIOs. For a lot of people, that felt like a huge accomplishment. To be honest with you, and this is not an ego trip, to me, that was a walk in a park, to be honest.
Do you feel like the budgets are going back to the CIOs or to the IT leadership, given that there's a lot of technology push and demand that's being put on the business?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's always been a partnership between a CIO and CFO. I think traditionally the CFO and the COO always held the budget. But in order for CIOs to be successful, they have to have control of that budget. And the CFO, they're business oriented and they're financially oriented, and that's where the partnership comes from, right? But if the CFO is dictating what the budget is and tightening the noose around the CIO is not being able to progress with transformation and make the necessary investment in technology. So I very much agree that a CIO should own the budget and they should work alongside the CFO to ensure that the business is kept abreast and why we're making the investments that we're making and why we need the funds that we need in order to invest in technology. You have to invest in technology in order to do things right. You just can't cheap out on it anymore. I think after a while, if you transform an organization successfully, I think at some point you could probably drive efficiency and find savings and stuff, but there'll always be something new that you have to invest in. I think technology should have its own line item, its own budget. The CIO should be accountable for that.
Which makes complete sense. If you cut off the oxygen for the IT department, you can't expect the part of the organization to really flourish and to benefit from what's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, Mike, I've worked under those conditions where the CFO and the COO or vice versa or together were really owning the budget and then crippling the ability to be able to make the correct investments because they thought best, or perhaps allocate money somewhere else. Technology is it's not urgent, or you can live with your old PC. You're okay. You don't need something new, and not really understanding the nuances that goes behind that and running that and keeping the lights on.
So for CIOs that are going through transformation themselves, what are some past experiences that you've learned from that you would like to pass on?
That's a great question. Hopefully I don't have a very long answer on that. I think, and I've said this publicly, to me, a good CIO is somebody who understands technology, is business oriented, but not so business oriented. This is why we have a CFO and a COO, and you don't need to be an exact replica of them. And most CIOs that I've encountered over the years tend to be more CFOs disguised as CIOs and looking more at the P&L instead of actually where is technology going, forecasting where that roadmap is, and just being a good investor and investing in that right technology and making sure that you're making right decisions. So I would say be more of a technologist at heart, less more of a business person. Look at the technology trends and be a big voice in the room. And if you believe in something, just obviously push for it. I would encourage that. There's a saying I stole from one of my CEOs, which was speed and persistence. I would encourage people to speed is key, like making good, fast decisions. One of the things I love the most leaving the enterprise world was not having to go through the process of a painful RFP, which in my experience has been one of the Achilles heels of being able to transform rapidly because you're taking 6, 7, 8, 9 months of just looking at something. And by the time you perfect it and by the time you sign off on it, whatever you were working on almost becomes redundant at that point. And now you have to make up for the time to address it. So for me, vetting something is proper and doing the due diligence, but doing it fast and then making a decision and being able to adapt quickly and moving on. So fast and being persistent about what you want and being able to push on it as long as it makes sense and it's good. Those are some of the things that I've looked back and learned and mistakes that I've seen other CIOs do and promised myself I'm not going to repeat those mistakes.
And I think with some of the advent of technology, like the deep research that's now available in some of the AI models, it can go and do some of that deep research on the vendors and on the technology that can really speed up the time to value of, I have an idea, I want to do something as a POC, and then I can prove it very quickly and make a determination if I want to keep it long-term or not, versus bringing in a team to go through that traditional approach where it can take a lot of man hours because it's just a lot of effort to dig into the claims of the business and determine if the security and all the other things you need to ensure are met before you bring in a new technology or even a new partner into your marketplace. So in your view, what separates tactical CIOs from ones that are more strategic?
I think you have to have a little bit of both. So you have to be a little strategic and then obviously tactical. I've described myself both as a sort of a visionary of being able to have that vision and where things should be, and then also the integrator. You can't be more than the other. You almost have to balance it a little bit. To me, I love tactical CIOs because they roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty and get in there and start moving the needle. Most CIOs that I've worked with in the past often are way too strategic and they're a little too high up there, meaning that they're 30, 40, 50,000 feet above, and they don't have a sense of what's happening at the integration level if you have that kind of gap. You don't need to necessarily be in the weeds, but you need to have your ear close of what's happening and making sure that the vision that you had is being integrated in a proper way. I think that's a big key differentiator between the two. But I love somebody who can be both strategic and tactical. I think that's the perfect recipe of that 50-50 balance. If you're more than the other, I think it creates a problem. If you're too tactical, in my opinion, you end up getting into the weeds too much and start to micromanage. If you're too strategic, you're way too far away and not really paying attention to what's happening.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that you were one of the early adopters of Salesforce Einstein AI. What real world impacts did you see from more of a tactical point of view when implementing that platform?
So we were the first personal injury firm and Mike Morse, and we've always used Mike Morse really as the blueprint. Just really quick, you said VaynerMedia at the opening statement and Mike Morse. There's 20 other law firms that I've helped transform in the last 2.5 years. That I'll even get lost in naming those firms. But we've always used Mike Morse as the guinea pig throughout all this. If it can work at Mike Morse, then it should theoretically work for all these other law firms. And so we made an investment very early on into Salesforce. Notion that it could take a long time to build something in Salesforce and it could cost a lot of money. Salesforce is not cheap, but we were able to do it in a timely fashion and meet the budget. So we were excited about that. And as the world of AI came into place, Salesforce was one of the first companies to come to us and say, hey, we're investing billions. And Einstein at the time, now Agentforce, as they've relabeled themselves and stuff. And we think that you can be a perfect candidate, that we can take this technology and apply it to what you've already built and make it better. And so from a technical standpoint, we really just wanted to get a firm understanding of what Agentforce can do, the various lens that it can use. And that was quite exciting for us because they don't segregate to one model. You can use everything from OpenAI to Grok to DeepSeek, which was exciting because now you can use different powers in real time and being able to accelerate your methods. A lot of it was us from a technical side of things. Okay, AI is cool. Got it. It can automate. Got it. What are the problems that we have as an organization that we can work with Salesforce to figure out that we can either automate or make more efficient, or they become absolutely redundant through Agentforce? And that was the tactical side of just spending that time understanding the capabilities of the technology and also understanding what our gaps were or areas that were kind of problems for us that we went back to Salesforce and said, these are some of the problems that we have on a daily basis. Can you solve them? Yes, great. Like, how do we do that in the roadmap? We did it in took about 2 to 3 months actually to build out some cool products. One of the ones that we built out that I can actually talk about was when we get a lead in, that is a lead that we've paid for that comes in, whether it's organic or lead generated, it goes through phases and it starts with intake. And at the intake level, we try to determine early on as best as we can, is this a lead that we want to take? Is this a potential case that we can win? Do we keep it or do we refer it out? And so using an algorithm and using AI to be able to go back to our 30 plus years of data, to be able to aggregate that and then give us a sentiment score or score that basically gives us in almost real time, like, hey, after you plugged in XYZ data, this case has a potential of so and so, or you might want to actually, based on the statistics and based on your historic data, you usually refer this case out. And giving us that score has been always the holy grail for this industry. And being able to use Agentforce to be able to bring that to life has been pretty amazing. With the data and the research we've done so far, it seems like it's working, which is exciting and scary at the same time of being able to do those kind of predictions.
So you mentioned something, which is the technology like Agentforce is really a shiny North Star of where companies want to go. And there's a lot of opportunity that can come from it. But there's a lot of businesses who have technology stacks like Salesforce where there's a lot of legacy and technical debt. They've never addressed the fundamentals. They're using the same iteration of Salesforce since the very beginning of their business. and it's grown to a point where it no longer has the stability and it has the potential to bridge that gap to jump to where you can leverage and trust the data that is historical to be able to train the models to give you those types of outputs. Based on your understanding, what are the things that CIOs who are at that tipping point, who want to walk into the future but are really hamstrung and burdened by the past, what are things that they should do and where do they go to for help?
That's a very interesting question. It's a little hard to answer, and I'll explain why. So normally what I would say is you need to clean your house before anything and get it in order. And a lot of people tend to say, how am I supposed to do that? Or that's going to take forever. Or, hey, John G, that's easier said than done. We can't all do 90-day transformations like you did. But normally what I would say is you have to get your foundations and clear that up and take that leap and go a little backwards and clean up all that mess in order to prepare your organization to be at the forefront for AI. That's been great for somebody like Mike Morse because we did that grunt work 3 years ago, not necessarily preparing. I didn't have a crystal ball that said, oh, AI is coming, so do this. We did this because I thought that was the right thing to do. And just serendipitous, AI came along and, oh, wow, we're perfectly situated compared to your average firm to be able to make those advancements and do that. But what's happening in this landscape also is that AI is just fundamentally getting so great that I've actually had conversations where even if you stay put and your data is a mess, hey, just put the AI layer on top of it and it'll be fine actually, because even if your data is messy, the whole thing, especially when you think about agents, right, on the AI side of things, create an agent that can actually aggregate your data and do it. And so I'm torn a little bit because it's so early on stages where AI is still making advancements and potentially you can actually retrofit it in a decentralized state, even if your infrastructure and your data is messy and it can work off of it. But I'm still a big believer that you have to clean your house a little bit and get it in order and fundamentally build it in order for it to accept. It's almost like building blocks and building a house. You have to have a very strong foundation before you start adding a layer or everything can come down tumbling. Or perhaps you're making such a big investment in AI and it's not working appropriately because your data is so fragmented again. So I'm a little torn in between. That's why my answer isn't 100% clear, because we're advancing so quickly. And there are opportunities where I've been told, whether it's through Microsoft, our partners at Microsoft, we have one of the biggest partnerships with Microsoft, and they were very early investors in OpenAI. I've heard them saying the same tune. So is Salesforce. You know what? We're getting to a place where even if your data is crazy, don't worry about it. The AI is going to curate that. So I'm a little torn. I would need more time to see where that's going and whether that's going to be effective or not.
So let me ask a second part to that, and I fully appreciate and I agree that AI is becoming almost, I don't want to call it self-aware, but it's learning so quickly that you can give it some pretty messy information and it can figure out what is needed to accomplish the goal. But I'm wondering, do you believe CIOs are aware that it's not only the technology cleaning house they need to be aware of, but also it's how they run their division and their business that also needs to be addressed? And let me give you an example. Decision-making between how business makes decisions and how IT execute has always been a challenge. Now the expectation, I feel, is almost heightened of what business wants and how quickly they want it done. Is that something that needs to be addressed by the CIO, or is it someone else in the business that needs to take a look at kind of the body as a whole of the business IT relationship and how technology gets really leveraged and used on a day-to-day basis before jumping into some of these new innovations?
I think a little bit of both. For sure, I'll say this, AI has definitely struck a nerve. So there's the organizations that didn't believe in technology as much or didn't want to invest as much or didn't carve out the right budget, or hey, we have different priorities and let's invest more in marketing. Who cares about technology and stuff? It's boring anyways and stuff. I think that's where AI has struck a big nerve. And a lot of these companies are now finally coming out of the woodchuck and just being like, hey, we're ready. Let's do it. And just throwing money in. And I've seen situations where CIOs are not prepared for that and don't know where to go from there. Just being like a deer in the headlights of, oh man, okay, I'm being now told I can do all this and I can do that. And I don't know where to start. And I've been preaching about this all this time, but now all of a sudden they're listening to me and I don't know what to do. I believe the CIO and the CEO and the COO have to work together. The CIO has to make a conscious investment and has to be able to show to both the CEO and COO of, hey, these are the areas and the opportunities that we need to invest in to be able to see either low-hanging fruit or long-term investment in something like AI. But to go back, AI has for sure struck a nerve, and I'm seeing it more and more. I guess from where I stand, I almost don't appreciate it because I see these organizations who are coming now out and basically saying we're ready to do it, but they're still not ready to make an investment in what needs to be done. They're just looking at that shiny object. There's a fear. There's a natural fear of, oh my God, I'm going to miss out of this and I'm going to get crippled. And I think it doesn't help for a lot of these visionaries and executive officers and founders who spend some time looking at things at a high level and they have a misconception of what AI is, because I think there is a little bit of a misconception. AI is moving at a fast pace. Is it where we think that it's going to take over the entire world and stuff? I don't think it's there yet, but there is this misconception of, I think it is. And if we don't do something about it now, it's the end of us. I think you have to continue looking at AI. You have to make the proper investments. I would start with low-hanging fruit. I wouldn't really invest huge, big money because it is still the Wild West. And there are a lot of companies that are still trying to figure out, it almost feels very much like the dot-com era. And to me, I wouldn't necessarily call it a bubble, but I do think that there's going to be eventually this place where the Metas and the Salesforce and the Microsofts prevail, and some of these small companies either get swallowed up, disappear and stuff. So it's interesting. You almost have to watch a little bit what's going on, but also consciously make the right investments. It's a very tricky journey, to say the least.
Where are CIOs going for counsel or for help? Are they looking at other CIOs? Are they looking internal to internal teams? Are they going and hiring consultants? What are you seeing?
They're all going to ChatGPT. I think, and even for me, I would say, even I end up consulting with other CIOs and, hey, what are you doing and stuff like that. So nobody really knows. There isn't a defined blueprint. This is a very much an uncharted territory. It's been 2 years in the making. And again, it's been 2 years in the making, but as I said before, every 4 weeks, this is changing. So everything that you were taught 4 weeks ago is now become redundant in something new. And so it's very hard to keep up. People would vary. I see some people on LinkedIn who are getting certifications left and right, and that's how they feel that they're keeping in tune. Other people are just watching from a distance. I don't necessarily have a right solution for that, but what I've been doing is watching the big players and the investments they're making. We were an early adopter of Microsoft Copilot. When Microsoft Copilot came out, it was, I think, 5, 6 different companies in the world that had access to it, and some of them the biggest names. From an SMB standpoint, we were the first one to actually get Copilot. And I think that was strategic for Microsoft. They wanted to see what the big players are going to say and vet it, and what was it good, is it good enough, and stuff before they released it to the general public. And you had somebody like Gemini, Google's product, and that they were late in the game and stuff, and they're just finally now trying to catch up in momentum. I think watching all these players, where that's heading, and again, identifying the needs of your organization, I think is critical. And then I'm a big believer in proof of concepts. I love proof of concepts because that's the only real way that you can test something. Demos are cool, but demo is like a basic interview, right? It's okay, I can see you're telling me you can do all these things, but until I actually put you into that place, I'm not quite sure if you're going to deliver. And so we've done, in the last year and a half, we've done a bunch of proof of concept with some companies, some successful, some not so successful. And that's helped us steer where we should be making investment. And the biggest issue most firms, and even we've faced it at Mike Morse, is the adoption of it. Not everybody wants to adopt, not everybody wants to follow through. And I think there's also this natural fear where a lot of people fear that AI is going to replace their roles. Why even bother? Why embrace that? We try not to see it from that lens. We do try to see it as another big change. And if we don't ride this ship, we are going to miss out. I think we look at it also as it can drive efficiency and can help us be more productive. And we have a responsibility towards our clients to be able to be thinking that way and not thinking selfishly. And frankly, all the investment we've made in AI, specifically around Mike Morse, we haven't gone back to the table and say, oh, great, we can let go of 10 people now and 20 people. We never think that way. We actually think of, okay, if we drove efficiency. Now, can we reposition this talent to do something different in the organizations?
So in the past, when CIOs had questions, they would go and hire a consulting firm, whether it's an IBM, Accenture, or they go to a management consulting firm like McKinsey and Bain. Do you think those industries, the trading time for money, the expensive consultants, do you think that's going to change?
That is going to change. The answers that you used to traditionally look for a consultant, you can actually look on your own now. These engines are sophisticated enough to give you valuable data, build decks for you, build anything that you kind of want or you put your mind to it. I think there is going to be, so a couple of years ago, there was the rise of the CISO, which was the Chief Information Security Officer, because of big security concerns, and that's still in demand. I think you're going to see the big rise, and it's happening already, the rise of the AI consultant. And I met for the first time a very lovely young gentleman who literally has a master's in AI. I didn't even know there was a master's in AI. I think you're going to start to see a pattern where people, from an education standpoint, aren't putting more emphasis in that. Whether it's right or wrong, I can't say, but I'm seeing more of that. But the big companies like the McKinseys of the world, from a consulting standpoint, I wouldn't throw all your money there, because it's still such a new thing that I don't believe everybody has an answer for it. And any answers that you want or any questions that you have, you can find it using AI.
It does. So let me throw a hypothesis at you here and get your feedback.
Yeah.
So if we look at a continuum, you have on one side are the consultants. It's the done for you model. You pay a bunch of money, you have people come in and they do it for you, whether it's developing your software, fixing a problem, or even outsourcing the MBAs to figure out more business strategy. And on the other end of the continuum, you have what I would call a do-it-yourself model, which is where you're going to hire your own people internally. And you sometimes benefit from some really good people, but you don't get the benefit of the groupthink or the learnings from other businesses to bring in. Do you believe that there's maybe a middle place, more of a done with you model that might take off, where you're bringing the systematized, the proven, the proof of concepts, the accelerators to the market, and you're not doing it based on time and hours, you're doing it more on outcomes? Do you think that's a place that's going to get traction and might be a offering to the market that is not really being realized?
You have to repeat that question, because it went, I love the hypothesis, but I lost it a little bit. Sorry.
Sure. So the hypothesis is, do you believe there's a middle spot where instead of paying consultants per hour, and instead of trying to hire all the people internally yourself, is there a third way, a done with you, where you're bringing in experts or proof of concepts, accelerators, and almost pre-built initiatives that you can leverage to help you get to your goals?
Great question. I think the traditional is being disrupted as we speak. Traditionally, you would look to a consultant that would come in, do everything for you. I think there are still companies that are going to be leveraging that, but it is changing every day because of AI. I do see that traditional model being disrupted. I'm seeing it today. In fact, I give you a great example at Mike Morse. About several months ago, and it's a little sore subject, but I'll say it, we did hire a consultant agency to come and help, because we looked at it as the AI is so new. I'm not a builder per se from an AI perspective, so we did still need a builder. And then we came up with the areas of efficiency that we can drive and tell that builder what to do. So that builder ended up building something, and it's a viable product that we're using today with the firm, and it's great and it works. But funny enough, we met with Microsoft, we showed them this product, and they were able to build it in seconds because of plugging in an agent. My CEO, we laugh about it now. I don't think he laughs about it, because he's sunk in some good amount of money for the consultants. He looks at me, he goes, "This became redundant almost immediately. Like, we could have done it ourselves." And I said, "That's right, but we didn't have AI, didn't have agents at the time when we did it." And so as it's progressing more, we're starting to see things that we traditionally were able to do through a consultant or whatever, the traditional model, not fading away, but saying, you know what, let's try it this way and see what happens. So that was an example of what we did before with the consultant, to now fast forward, we're doing a lot of things on our own and not requiring consultants, and just going directly to players like Microsoft or Salesforce and basically saying, here's some of the ideas, how can we work together and stuff. Of course, because it's such an ever-evolving thing, I think we're going to be hiring probably more people that their mind is geared towards AI and helping us in that respect. But I think that consultant model, for us, at least we tried it. It worked for a moment, but we quickly have now since then pivoted over to, you know what, we can do it ourselves, and the technology is evolving at such a fast pace. I'm not sure if I answered your question wholeheartedly, but that's how I read it.
No, you absolutely did. And it gives an example where a company using a technology like Salesforce had a lot of technical debt, and they really did not know what their org looked like. They had no visibility on process. And so every time they went to go make a change, it broke something. And so they hired a company to come in and map out their processes from a business point of view, looking at the actual metadata and really mapping it out. And I believe they spent close to $500,000 doing this. There's a new tool that just came out and it could do it in 5 minutes. So I think it's identifying where the pain is and then seeing if there's a native tool. But I'm curious, in your perspective, companies that are investing a lot of money and have a lot of time and people invested into platforms like Salesforce, you can't just rip and replace it. You're going to go to Microsoft Dynamics or another tool that's going to be just as expensive. What are some of the immediate pains that CIOs are facing that if only they could solve these little nuggets, it would alleviate a lot of the headache and things that are keeping them up at night? Is there anything that stands out to you?
Again, you have great questions, Mike. I'll say a couple of things because you actually reminded me of something when I was at MDC Partners in Stagwell, and this is 2019. A year before I joined, the company had paid $2.5 million to PwC. I think it was PwC. Sorry, PwC, if you hear this, to build them a process for business continuity and disaster recovery. And it was insane to me that they would have spent that amount of money. And what was even crazier was they built it. I don't know if it was reheated data or just did a copy and paste from some other template that they built, but it was never used. Fast forward to today, ChatGPT pushes that out for me in seconds. And it doesn't cost me $2.5 million for anybody. It builds the entire process, tells us what to do. It's quite interesting because you can literally tell using ChatGPT or Copilot, you usually can just say, hey, this is my company, this is what I have, this is the basic process, build me around that, and it'll literally do it for you. I think that most CIOs and what keeps them up at night is the challenge of keeping up with how quickly the technology is changing. I think what's keeping them up is things that they didn't address in the last couple of years, whether it was because they were hindered by a CFO and a COO to not make the conscious investment and now having to figure out how to get forward. I think what we touched on, which was basically, do you leave your organization in a decentralized state and hope to God that the AI gets so smart that you can just put it on top, or do you take the opportunity to clean it up? I think all those things are keeping people like myself up at night and figuring out what the best path forward is. I think there's definitely a security element as well, too, right, where it keeps up. I couldn't tell you how many CEOs are just going into things like ChatGPT, which is a great tool, but we still don't know how it's governed and where that data goes and stuff. And to my recollection, unless something's changed, OpenAI is still a private organization. Nothing is free. That's what I've learned over the years, especially in my industry where legal, you have to be extra careful. You are handling first-party data, so you have to be very mindful of that and where that data is injected and put in. And I think that's definitely keeping up some people up at night. Those are some of the areas that I've seen and also felt personally, what are we doing? How are we doing? Where should we be making investments? Are we doing it in an ethical way? Are we being secure? I do see a lot of organizations that do spend an enormous amount of time trying to unlock that and figure out how do we do it secure? And then they get pressure from executives or the business and themselves if you're not moving fast enough. I'm trying to do it in the right manner, but you're not doing fast enough. And so you get this additional pressure from there as well.
I recently met a CIO who just stepped into the position. There was a bit of chaos when he came in. And the first thing he wanted to do is get a lay of the land of just, I don't care if it's right or wrong, just turn the lights on and show me. And he had a really hard time getting reality checks or really truth from his employees because he's a senior leader. And he wanted to find out what his org structure looked like. He wanted to see what his technology landscape looked like. He wanted to see who was involved, what skill sets, how the system was being funded. And so he had all these questions, but no one would give him an answer because everyone was afraid of, if I share this, it's going to compromise or it's going to highlight all the problems. Yeah. Do you think CIOs want to have this information brought to light, or If you've been a CIO for a number of years, is it easier just to stay with what you know and to operate knowing that there's spots that you're not aware of?
You need to know what's going on. You need to pull the truth. One of the things I do is we go through a discovery process, which is what kind of you talked about. And I think it's critical to know your lay of the land, and you should be able to treat it almost your first 90 days. If you're coming in as a seasoned CIO in a large organization, you actually have to take the time to really understand the business, understand where the dead bodies are, how it's working, what's broken. You almost don't want to come across as an IRS agent, because that's what makes people feel, oh man, he's here. And if I tell him that it's broken and he thinks it was me, I'm going to be construed as a problem. I try to tell people that's not what I'm here. I need you to tell me the truth, because if I don't know what's going on, I can't help you. If you're only giving me 50%, I can't help you. I don't care who did it. I don't care why it's here. And this is why I'm here to solve it. But if you don't help me, I can't do my job. And so I think it is extremely critical to be able to have the right stakeholders, and those stakeholders to be completely open and honest, because that's another thing I've seen historically where it hinders, at least a good CIO, it hinders them from the ability to be able to get to the source of truth and fix. And then it takes them time to have to figure it out on their own. Now, having said all that, I'm also a big believer, because my father taught me this at a very young age: believe nothing what you hear and have to. A smart CIO will read the room, hopefully, and also know exactly is what's being told to him. Is it real? Does it make sense? And then I would apply a little bit of effort to finding out the truth yourself as well, just to validate that and bring those two things.
Do you think a neutral third party would be a good option?
I think so, because at some point you get tunnel vision. Being in a place at the same time, you become complicit and you become conditioned, in my opinion. And so having a third party come in, as long as you're open to it, because a lot of CIOs I've seen also, there's this sense of what's going to happen to my job, and maybe they're going to hold me responsible. It becomes the opposite of what we said. It really falls back on the CIO, and some CIOs don't want to open that up, or they don't want to accept the reality that they have to accept the third party's view. And that's happened to me quite a lot, by the way, over my years, where I come in as that third party to look under the hood and stuff. And for the most part, I've been lucky where I've gotten actually good partners, where they've been very willing to work with me, and they understand firsthand that my knowledge is just here, and I would welcome somebody coming in with a fresh new pair of eyes, and that helps tremendously. But I have also seen the other side where people get very timid in job security, and they resist, and they do the blame shifting. I would have done what you wanted me to, what you're planning on doing, John G, but I was busy doing a bunch of other things and keeping the lights off, and finding various excuses instead of just coming out and saying, you know what, I wasn't capable, and I'm just appreciative that you're coming in here. Let's work together. I always found that those being the best partnerships versus the combative ones, which also can stifle somebody like myself who's just coming in to do one job to help transform. That's happened before in many various other parts of where I come in, and I'm dealing with combative people who are just stuck in their ways. Honestly, between you and me, I'd rather not have to deal with that and just deal with people who are just much more open and being like, you know what, thank you for coming in here, and let's work together and figure this out.
I think it's that transparency that is so critical, that if the organization is trying to implement a new way of doing business, I think it was Duolingo, and I think it was also maybe it was Shopify, where they said, hey, we're going to be an AI first company. You can't hire people until you can show me that this can't be satisfied through AI. I think those are wonderful stories to read, but the fundamentals are they probably had their business organized in such a way as they could. And when companies read that and they want to do the same thing, I think it is critically important to have a point of view of, are we even in a place as a company to do this? Are we structured? Can we iterate quickly? It reminds me, I worked with the Department of Taxation for one of the states, and for them, innovation was moving from 3 pieces of carbon copy paper to 2. They just had no fundamental culture that allowed them to move quickly. Versus you look at companies like Amazon, where they do things differently. The employees are allowed to fail forward. They need to learn from it. They need to iterate quickly, but it's for them, if you're not moving fast and breaking things, you're not trying. And if a company does not have the awareness of where they sit on that spectrum, it doesn't matter what innovation you try doing. If the culture is going to hold you back, you've got a problem. Do you think companies are self-aware, or do you think they need almost a bit of an aha moment of, this is really what we look like, almost a I don't want to call it a mirror, but almost step on the scale and let's see what your truth is?
Yeah, I think it depends on the company, but most companies I've dealt with are either self-aware when I got there, or they've become self-aware, or they're becoming self-aware of, we need somebody to come in here because we're starting to feel that staleness and stuff. And great, and again, I keep highlighting this, but Mike Morse is a perfect person to see that and be at the forefront of that, of knowing exactly at what point, even when he was seeking me, I think he had just become self-aware of, we need this, we need somebody else to come in here with a different point of view, maybe even blow it all up and just re-engineer this. And are there the Amazons of the world? I would say they are, but it's a handful of them compared to the other.
What do you believe are some blind spots that CIOs have, and how would you advise them?
So really great questions there, Mike. I say blind spots. Again, I go back to, I think about the traditional CIO. I'm a different breed. I've always described myself as a little bit of a different breed than the traditional CIO. But when I think of a traditional CIO, their blind spots are staying comfortable, becoming complicit, not taking initiative, waiting too long, falling into the bureaucratic abyss, which I hate the most. I'm starting to look at people that are under me, that in looking to them, I always loved, I don't know if you ever practiced this, but I always loved that quote that Steve Jobs said of, I surround myself and I hire smart people, and my job is to listen to them and get their advice. I don't know if he ever practiced that, just knowing his personality, but I love that. And I try to do that. I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I for sure have experience, but I like to listen to people. I have seen CIOs that don't do that. And whether it's an ego thing or not, just, hey, it's my way or the highway. This is how I know how I've done it for the last 20 years. This is how we're going to do it. It's a proven methodology, whatever goes in that mind of thinking that it's the right thing. And I don't agree with that. In fact, even my experience, what I did 5 years ago, what I did 4 years ago, in fact, what I did a year ago has not completely changed. There might be a better way. And if I don't know it, I need to be an open book. And I think that's a great successful trait for a good CIO, if he's a good listener, to listen to the audience and people. I used to be, before I became a CIO, I used to be that person, the young guy in the group that had cool ideas, and I would try to voice them. They would fall on deaf ears. And I always said to myself, if I end up being in that role as a CIO, I'm going to always want to listen to the people around me. And maybe some ideas make it, and maybe some ideas aren't great, but it's being able to listen and see what other people are doing, I think is super great.
John, is there anything else you'd like to share?
For anybody who's looking to become a CIO, or for anybody who is a CIO, I would say try to change your mindset. Try to think about the future of what investments you want to make in technology. Stop looking at that P&L or how can I drive savings. We're living in a world where you actually have to make an investment. So I wouldn't look at it all about just cost efficiency. I think cost efficiency will be derived when you undergo the transformation. You'll always be able to go back to the CFO and make the CFO happy, but don't look at the CFO as your North Star to try to make happy, because you're never going to get anywhere from making the company as a whole better just by driving savings. You have to make a conscious investment, and just be mindful, especially today with AI, where you're making your investment, because it still is very much new. It still is the Wild West, and you want to be able to make sure you're making conscious, good decisions and in respect to investing in technology. That's my 2 cents.
Fantastic. John, thank you so much for bringing your clarity, depth of conversation. Your experiences across industries and your ability to turn complexity into momentum are exactly what today's IT leaders are looking for. So thank you so much for joining today, and thanks to our audience for listening to this episode of Heartbeat.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.